Welcome to the SEA podcast. I'm your host, Peter Hissey. Have the privilege of welcoming Phil Cooper. As I was going through your resume, I think I could spend the 30 minutes just reading what you've done. But right now you're working as an EOS implementer, among other things. You have scaled a business for a number of years. Phil, it's great to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Great to be here, Peter.
So to start, Phil, would love to hear your entrepreneurial journey. You ran a pest control company for 30 plus years, but maybe take us back to your first taste of being an entrepreneur and then how that evolved into, running a small business.
So do we have to go to the age of five?
Hey, whatever it takes, whatever it takes.
Be here all day. No, so look, I've always had the entrepreneurial urge, and I'll credit that to my dad. Like we had I came into a second generation family business, and we sat around the dinner table every night talking business. I mean, it was my dad worked his ass off building this company. So he starts it in 55 and gets married to my mom in 62, and they build a a family owned business, and it was amazing. And I started actually working at 5 years old. I would go down, and we have these route boards and magnet boards, and my favorite story is there was all these, we had like three people working, and they would hand in cards of what they did for their work, and my job was to get on the stool and reach all the way up, because I am still vertically challenged, but I was really vertically challenged then. And I'd get to the magnet and take the magnet from one board, look at the card, and if it was there, I'd find the magnet and move it to the next board. And it had 4 weeks and the people down. And what was left on the board was the not done list.
Hmm.
And now we run reports to get not done lists, right? Computer generated reports. And I would ask my dad, like, why did they not do the work? Which was a really bad question to ask him. And yeah, so that was the basis. I mean, and those things still, I mean, the fact that I can talk about that today resonates, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I grew up with it, and and I always knew I wanted to be in the family business, and went to school and come out in '84, go to college, get my marketing and finance degree. I'm not a bug guy. I'm a business guy. My brother was a scientist and was budding, and my job was to make the company into something that we could get my brother into and that he would be excited about, because he really couldn't stand the business. And we did.
Hmm.
And he
Yeah.
becomes one of the top three bed bug experts in the world. He's a doctor of entomology now. And the two of us built this company into something amazing. We take it from 3 people to 110 people, the largest privately held company in New Jersey.
Wow.
And that's the journey from '84 to 2018 when we exited. An unexpected exit. It doesn't make it to the third generation. Hurts. At the same time, my dad always said, build it to sell. And we did build it to sell, never expecting that we would sell.
That's great. So, did you work anywhere between college and then starting at the family business and then parlaying that into taking it from 3 to 110? There are a lot of growing pains, I'm sure. Maybe
So,
talk through some of that.
yeah, some super tough decisions there. I mean, I had always worked, but in my college years, my two primary jobs were working for General Cinema and Pepsi. General Cinema in their bottling plant in Cheverly, Maryland, and Pepsi working in their marketing. And I did, I had some amazing mentors there, but they had made me an offer to put me into a management training program. And I had to decide, am I coming back to the family business, or am I going to this other company, maybe then get my master's and then come back to the business? And I've had friends that have done both. I can remember Dr. Robert Dyer, who was my GW professor, begging me to go take that job at Pepsi. And I went back to the family business. So I didn't take that step. Um, did I do okay? Yeah. Do I think it would have been, would the path have been different if I had gone the other way? Yeah. And do I think both are possible for people? Yes. I think, there's no right answer to that.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Did you have who were your key mentors during that time period? Because my question is, who are the mentors during that time period? And then as you grew, did those mentors remain? How did you find new mentors to help you to scale the business?
The mentors are everything, right? One is
Yes.
Robert Hendrickson, is one of my, the key mentor of my life. He was the president of Merck. He was the president of international manufacturing. happens to be doing comes in as a guest lecturer at GW and my senior year, and I buddy up, and we've had a relationship ever since, and he would teach me so many things that were applicable to, running a family business, even though he's running this, you know, international manufacturing for the biggest pharmaceutical in the world. And he's still, again, I still, he's been there. But yeah, I have many mentors up to this point. I think the other, two big ones were my Vistage chair, Martha Curran, who I still keep in touch with, and Ed Robinson, who's another Vistage chair. So two Vistage chairs just happen to, be lucky. And, I'm always surrounding myself with great people who are smarter than me that can bounce ideas off of. Yeah, I have a lot of mentors.
Great. And any key pieces of advice that you remember that still are with you today, or you go back and you say, wow, that piece of advice really gave me the confidence to do whatever risk it may have been?
Yeah, it's things change.
Hmm.
And what worked today may not work in the future. And when we're doing EOS, we have a thing called hitting the ceiling and evolution and revolution, and knowing that, you know, you've got to evolve. And if you if you hang on to what was working in the past and you want it to work when the company goes to 500 employees or 1,000 employees, that's scaling. It doesn't work. And the things that may have worked tried and true change. And that's what Hendrickson really, really impressed upon me early on. It's Phil, your company is going to change over time and you need to evolve. You need to become different. Your company is going to become different, but you've got to become different. You can't stop growing. You can't stop changing.
When did the desire change? Because you can, like your parents did, have a great small business, make a great living, and have three employees because you're doing great work. When did you decide that, hey, I don't want to have a 10-person business. Like this is great, but I want to go from 10 to 20 to 30 because there's the risk there of,
Mm.
well, yeah, I'm now not just I don't just want a job, I want to build a business. Could you talk about that mentality?
From when I was a kid. I mean, I just
Yeah.
knew. I mean, I'll give you a fun story. When I graduated from GW, what I had my parents is a U.S. News and World Report, and they were like the fastest growing CEOs in the country. And I cut out the middle picture and stuck my picture in there, and dated it like 10 years from now. Like I always had that dream that I was going to be that person, that I wanted to do special things with my dad's business. So there's the desire. I think most entrepreneurs, you know, there's two different approaches. One, they just want to be able to be in control. So in the pest control business where I come from, there's 20,000 companies in the United States. Only 100 are over $6 million in revenue. And even, and so you have this massive drop off. So most of the companies are, one to three, person companies. And we see this in all different industries, right? And they hit that ceiling and they get to maybe $500,000 or maybe $1 million, and they're struggling and they're working hard and doing everything they can. And that's not necessarily bad, but that's different than if you're scaling the business, right?
What were some of the growth, we'll call them, lessons learned in that growth phase where if you had it back, maybe you wouldn't have done it differently, but you definitely learned something. So missteps isn't the right word. What were some of those growing pains?
Well, I think the biggest growing pain was just the lesson that I learned most was don't just go and do things mass. And what I mean by that, and I know I'm not really being clear, we would get an idea and then we would just, instead of testing it and maybe doing a pilot, we would just go and do it on everybody. And
That's
sometimes it
cool.
worked and sometimes it didn't.
Yeah.
And this was a lesson my mom would teach us, and she again still does, which is just because you think it's going to work doesn't mean it's going to work. And so I've learned over the years that we do, I'd rather test something out. I don't want to be so stuck on tests that I'm incapable of moving quickly. I want to be nimble. At
Yeah.
the same time, I don't want to be so nimble that I go off the cliff. We went off the cliff so many times in the early years. And every once in a while you get so cocksure of what you're going to do, and it's going to work, and you just go headlong, be damned to everybody else, right? And we just go and do. And then we get, we get a facial, we go, splat right down. It's not a good day. Do I think I probably do it occasionally still? When you're doing it, you don't think you're doing it until you
Mhm.
fall flat on your face, right?
Yes.
I probably do it a lot less though. I'm very cognizant of it because as a visionary, as that person who has I have a high quick start. I don't need a ton of data. I have that feeling, and I'm going to go. But sometimes we got to be just rein ourselves back in just a touch.
No, it's great. And so as you think about the industry has changed so much, and now pest control is something that's on the top of most private equity tear sheets because there's recurring revenue. How did that evolve in the 34 years? Maybe just speaking about the industry, how did you evolve into? Did you see this coming that there was going to be so much investment in a home services industry, monthly recurring revenue?
No, no, and nobody saw it coming.
Yeah.
When, back in, I have to say it's about 20 years ago, there were two major acquisitions that happened that shook our industry, and that was Western Pest out of New Jersey and Ehrlich out of Pennsylvania get acquired. One by Rollins, one by Rentokil. And they get acquired for a number that multiples that nobody had ever seen. And when it happened, if you went back to and looked at the all the industry journals and all the talk, everybody said this acquisition stage, consolidation is what we called it, was going to last 3 to 5 years. That's what everybody thought. And if you were going to sell, you had this window, and maybe the multiples might increase. Well, the multiples increased a lot more than what we thought was never possible. And let's make one other thing that nobody's crystal ball had, that it would last 20 years. Oh, and by the way, we'd have this thing called PE. Like I had never heard of PE when this whole thing started 20 years ago. And so PE comes in, and what does that do? What happens simply with the service industry, at least in pest control, it reduced inventory. Inventory being the available companies that were the ones that they want. And now you've got scarcity, and everybody's fighting over the remaining few. And it continues. The other thing I don't think anybody saw happening was that the companies would get brighter and smarter, that the people that were running the companies, instead of being bug people or, in other industries, the plumbers, the people actually doing the work, you'd have really bright business people coming in with different ideas, different ways of approaching it. In our industry, nobody saw, the Utah Mormon-based companies coming in and doing door to door. And that's affected all kinds of service industries. Totally
Mhm.
changes how companies scale, how companies approach. And so many factors change the way businesses and entrepreneurs operate. And companies are growing faster, quicker, better. But then that adds more inventory for PE. It's this never-ending cycle.
Yes.
Oh, and by the way, PE impacts things in a positive way too, right? So yeah, all kinds of stuff that anybody who tells you they knew it, I challenge them to go back and look at the periodicals and what was being written back then and go like, no,
You
nobody.
didn't know it.
I don't think
Yeah.
anybody predicted this.
Yeah. Well, my takeaway there is you mentioned, I want to go back to where you say my dad always said build is to sell. Sometimes we hear, oh, I know investors are interested in this right now, so I'm going to build this. Whereas 30 years ago, what did it mean to build to sell? It didn't mean, hey, private equity wants recurring revenue, I'm going to build it. What were the fundamentals that you focused on when you were building to sell?
Well, it's when I heard that for the first time. And I always knew it, but I heard it for the first time in a Vistage speak. And I can't remember exactly the guy that came in. I should. And he listed the 10 things that you want your company to do that, investors would be looking at if you were going to sell. And as you looked at the questions, there was nothing in there that you said, geez, we would be a better company if we didn't do that. We'd have more fun. It's what we do in EOS, right? That's exactly what we're doing in EOS. We're building value. And if you build value, you're, you're better with your vision, you're better with your execution, you're better with scaling, you're better with, you're better with process, you're better with your data, you're better with your leadership teams. And so building to sell to me, and what my dad always taught me, and he said it, before I heard that speaker, was that we just need to make our companies better and better and better. If they're more valuable, then we never have to sell. It just means that we're going to be more profitable and we're going to grow and you're going to have more fun. It doesn't have to be this grind every day where you come home exhausted, you eat dinner and then you go to bed and you get up and do it again the next day. By the way, too many entrepreneurs do that, right? They get stuck working in their business. And to me, I guess building to sell is working on your business, not in your business, right?
Mhm. So putting on your EOS hat a little bit now, what are some of the biggest challenges you see in, any commonalities you see in business owners? You mentioned working on your business or in your business and not on it. What are some other things you see?
I see a lot of things. And, I think, when I look at EOS and then I look at this other thing that we're developing, this accelerated gross profit for frontline managers, I think, it's our ability to develop our leadership. I think that is one of the biggest challenges. It's the people challenge, that we do an okay job at developing our leadership and we try very hard at developing our leadership, but we fail on that. Without people, none of this works. You got to have the right people that share our values in the seats that God meant them to do, that they're going to be great at. And so most entrepreneurs want to develop from within. It's just what we do. And we believe that we can overcome all the odds, but we don't necessarily have all the tools and we don't overcome the odds. And we spend a lot of time developing people and we get smacked in the face and it just happens. I mean, I see it over and over again. So, that's the commonality. And this was the problem we had at Cooper Pests. I go back to 2015 and I walk into, and we're doing EOS and we're growing. We were growing like 5 to 10% before EOS, between 5 and 10 each year. And we go in, we start doing EOS, and now we're going to grow 30%. And now we need more people in leadership positions, right? And not an uncommon problem when people are doing EOS. And I walked into my vice president of operations and said, Dave, we're going to need 2 more managers in the next, 18 months. Who do you have on tap? And they were like, nobody. And I said, well, who do you think is a prospect? Nobody. And I said, like, that doesn't work.
Yeah.
Like, what do we want to do? I mean, like, we're not going from we're not hiring from the outside. Like, this doesn't work. We better get a solve for this. And, the solve was that we would develop our own internal leadership program, which I really plucked off from Enterprise Fleet and Rental Car. And, one of the best developers
They're
in the
famous. They're famous for that. Yeah.
so they're just monsters. And, the head of education, Steve McCarty, spent 20 hours with me showing under the hood, and it was basically my promise that, I wasn't allowed to take their IP and do it to the masses, but if I wanted to do it at Cooper, I could. And we did. And, that's the other thing that happens, Peter. It's sometimes you do things that you never realize that actually may have value. So we built this thing internally for ourselves, never ever thinking it would become a business. And now it is. We were able to take that own model and make it very generic. And now we go to frontline service managers and that, the people that manage that person in the field, that entry level position, the one that's most underserved. And we turn them into rock stars, but you go backwards, you were asking me, what happens with entrepreneurs, just I'm going to say that I bet you everybody that's watching this podcast is probably going to do something in their company that has some other kind of value that they don't even see or they don't even recognize, but they may recognize later on. And if you're building to sell, you're going to actually do a lot of that stuff.
That's so, Phil. My last question for you: what advice do you have to? I'll call it. There's a few different people I think really are tuning in, or the different stories. You have the pure entrepreneur. You knew you were going to be an entrepreneur since you were 5, but also you have the person working in a big corporate company who is about ready to take that leap. What advice do you have to the upcoming entrepreneur?
Well, number one, I do believe that you want to have an operating system. Whether it's EOS or scaling up, there's a number of different operating systems that I call it intentionality. To think that you're going to go in and just can wing it, I think I'm a big believer in structure. That's number one, which if you have a great operating system, it's then going to force you to develop the right leadership team. If you're okay with waking up every day and working your ass off and going home and eating dinner, and then waking up the next day and working your ass off and going home and eating dinner, then you don't need to do that. If you want to run a business, treat it like a business. And by the way, when you're stuck in that trap of, nobody can do it like me, guess what? Nobody can do it like you, but nobody has to do it like you. So that's my first advice. If you don't have that mentality going in, then, you may want to check. But if you're okay with that first thing, if you want to be in that grind, okay, I'm not going to say that you shouldn't do that. There's many people that enjoy that and they don't want to grow a business. So do you want to grow it or do you want to be in the grind? That's the first question. If you want to grow it, I'm going to say get an operating system. And, whether, again, it could be EOS, it could be another, but pick one and do it the way that operating system, and don't try to invent your own. Like, you don't need to do that. You certainly can, but
A lot of good ones out there. Yeah.
you know, it's going to be a lot more pain to reinvent the wheel when the wheel's already been made for you.
Yes. Yeah. Well, Phil, this has been awesome. Thank you for joining the podcast. I'm excited to share this with everyone and share more of your story.
And Peter, real quick, I know that there's probably a small segment out there of companies that are in that field service land. And if they are, just, reach out to me because I can change the way you view how you're developing those people. And you don't have to be using my product, but that underserved position, I'll do the self-serving, self-facing thing. We've done something extraordinary. And we're changing the way field service companies are doing. So that'll be my self-serving advertisement, I guess.
Oh, hey, that's great. Phil, thank you so much for joining.
Thanks, Peter.
Great.